This is welcome to the forum tonight, and we have several special guests here. Terence Blanchard, you probably heard of, is a local, born and raised here in New Orleans, is a trumpet player and writes a lot of soundtracks, most notably for all the Spike Lee movies. And Robin Burgess is his manager. She's here as well, and they brought their road manager along too, and his name is Vincent Bennett. So please welcome Robin, Vincent, and Terence. Well, I was at the premiere the other night for the Katrina film, and I know that you all had a great deal to do with that. You want to talk about that for a minute? Terence, what your role was in that, and how you felt, what you experienced in writing that music?
Well, it was a very surreal process for me because, working with Spike for a number of years, I've been accustomed to be just in the role of composer, the person who's going to create the emotional music, to kind of tie all of these elements together to create one story. But with this particular thing, I felt very passionately involved because it is my hometown. And when Spike came to me, we were in LA, living in LA, and we were working on the score to Inside Man, and he came to the apartment that I was living in just to work on the music. And the first thing he said to me was, when he walked in the door, he said, "I'm going to do a documentary about New Orleans." And my respect for him went sky high. I mean, I've always respected him as an artist, but I respected him as a man at that point because he was a person who knew the importance of telling the story and letting the locals tell their story, and he wanted to make sure that he gave them a forum to do that. So it was a little different because I wanted to be involved, and I didn't know how I was going to be involved, but thanks to my mother, I became more intimately involved because while we were recording the music, my mom was talking about how she hadn't been in the home yet, and Spike talked to her about shooting her going in the home for the first time, and she agreed, and once she agreed, then Spike wanted to sit down and talk to me and interview me.
Well, that was a very touching and poignant part of the movie. You were taking your mom back to her house.
It was hard. I mean, it's very hard. It's hard to even talk about now because it's not only my mom's home, but it's our neighborhood, it's our culture, it's our family, our friends. Just the community. When you go back there and you don't see those folks there, your first thought is, are they okay? And then the next thought is, well, where are they? They have to be someplace trying to survive. And then then you have the subsequent thoughts after that, about what's going on, how are we going to resolve this situation, and how can we tell our story? How can we get people to hear what we're going through? And that's the great thing about what Spike did. He gave these people a forum to talk.
That he did, and I think I read in the paper today that he's going to start doing follow-up programming for this, right?
Well, yes. I mean, as a matter of fact, once I leave here, I'm going to have dinner with him and some other folks who are actually interviewees in the documentary. His thought is that he wants to do a drama based on the lives of people here post-Katrina who are trying to get their lives back on track. I mean, our whole intention is to try to keep the story alive, not let the story die. That's the reason for the documentary. We're going to do an album of the music from the documentary later on this month with an orchestra. So we're going to do our part, and hopefully if the album comes out, that'll be another form to help keep the story alive. And then he wants to do this TV show. And he also talked about possibly coming back and doing a follow-up documentary like maybe 5 or 6 years down the road.
Well, that's necessary, I think. So you have several other lives, I think, in addition to composer. You're a player and you're a band leader. How much time do you spend on the road playing music?
Jim, you want to answer that question? I'm probably on the road, it seems like,
2 weeks out of the
yeah,
year.
about 3/4 of the year. It seems like I'm gone. I mean, and it's a mixed bag of tricks at this point in my life. When I was in my 20s, man, I dug it. I mean, like, let's go everywhere, let's go. But when you get a little older and you have kids and you want to watch your kids grow up, it's a mixed. You have mixed emotions about it because I really enjoy playing with the guys in my band. And the guys in my band, we're like family. Vinny can tell you that. When we're on the road, we take care of each other. We have a lot of fun playing with each other. But I also have my own family, my wife and my kids that I don't spend enough time around. So it's a juggling act constantly.
Well, tell us about your work as an educator. You also teach at the Monk Institute at USC, right? What do you do there?
Well, the whole concept behind the Monk Institute is what we're trying to do there is we're trying to find uniquely talented individuals, young musicians. And our goal is to try to kind of help them further their vision, because we really feel like, in education, there are a lot of things that have already been covered in formal education in terms of jazz, which we think is great, But for those guys who are kind of unique, those guys who don't really fall in, a specific category, what's best for them. Some guys who come, like the guitarist and used to be in my band, his name is Leonardo Waker. He's actually a graduate of the program. He's the type of guy that's very unique, where he's not a Wes Montgomery type. I'm not going to sit down and say, hey, you need to play the guitar this way. But he did have something that was very uniquely creative and his own. And Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter, they're on the board as well. When they heard him in his audition, they knew that he had to be a part of the program because he kind of represents what we're all about. And it's working. It's working. I mean, we have a lot of young, great, talented young musicians who are starting to feel comfortable with their personalities musically, because that's what we really want to do. We want to make them feel comfortable. Because sometimes when you don't fit, you tend to think that something's wrong with you, and that's not necessarily the case. With these guys, the more comfortable they become with their sounds and their styles, so to speak, the better off we'll be as a music community to have these very diverse styles.
That sounds like a great thing to be doing. Well, let me ask Robin a question. How do you manage the three people who are Terence Blanchard? Educator, performer, film scorer, composer?
I'm extremely organized.
Oh, yeah?
I am. I think that I'm always true to what Terence wants to do. It's not about necessarily what I think the best thing is to focus on at that point. It's a lot in consult with Terence with what he wants to do. I knew that, for example, from the When the Levees Broke project, that the music was so great and so rich that it couldn't just exist in that format. That we needed to do something else with it. So I sat down with Terence and I found, I asked him if that was something that he would like to do too. So of course he said, yeah, let's make that the next project on Blue Note. So almost when the Levees broke, when we wrapped on that music, we immediately, Vincent and I started segueing into, all right, now we've got to plan the recording project. And theoretically, we had thought that that project would happen in October or November. And the more we look at his schedule, it's like, well, there's just no way. We're going to have to crank this out really soon. So we go back to Terence and say, okay, you want the music to come out. But how badly do you want the music to come out? Because if it's really, a priority, then we need to make it by the end of September.
Wow.
So it was just over this weekend that I emailed a contractor in Prague and said, hey, we want to come to Prague. We want to record with the Prague Symphony Orchestra. Do you have available dates by the end of September? And she emailed back, we do. I mean, this happened on Saturday. And today I've got, the travel, itinerary kind of, tentatively done. I have the studio, I have the numbers of musicians that we're going to record, I have the pieces that we're going to record. He's writing the arrangements, and Vincent's talking to the promoters to see if we can't schedule his tour dates such that so that we can go directly into Prague and there's no break. I mean, so it's organization, but it's also knowing that you have these priorities and you've got to fit them in because they're important to the artist.
That's a lot of work. So we couldn't convince you to do this over in Roussel with the music.
Let's talk about that later.
Well, Vincent, you're kind of the ringmaster of this traveling circus, I suppose. You want to tell us about what it is to be a road manager for such a...
Flexibility, fearless, not all that. Because once she gets that going, she just calls me and tells me, you know what you had in mind for Terence for 2 weeks? Well, it's over here. And I think that in the last couple of days, we've changed Terence's itinerary at least 5 times, And we just got to keep him posted on what's going on. And it's constantly going with the flow, to say anything else, of what's going on with him and the new projects and the new directions. And it's always shooting for something better. Well, if we got this, we can do this, we can do this. And it's like she said,
Well, on the way here, I mean, you tell that story like literally 2 hours before we come here, I get a phone call.
Right, that Terence is probably going to get another movie. He needs to go see the screening, so he needs to go to LA in the next 48 hours. So, and then that changes because he's got to go to the monk competition in DC over the weekend. So my travel agent and I, like, he helped me move in and out of my apartment in LA. That's how close we are. Because we're on the phone that much, you know. And he's part of the team. I think what's great about these two is they're such great people as well. That the people that work for them, Terence's orchestrator, his band, you get sucked in. Even Jim, I think he got sucked into doing this documentary with us, and you learn to function as a team. And everyone steps up at all times. And I always think that's always my job is, especially on the road, you really never know what you're going to run into. Or even today, I woke up with my set of priorities. I haven't even gotten to those today. I'll probably go back after this and get to those because things just start coming in all directions. Especially my favorite line of Terence is, "Hey man," and that always means drop everything you're doing because here's the curveball. You know, and it could be
I say that all the time.
all the time. It could be at 6 a.m., it could be at midnight, it could be whenever, and you just got to go and get to it. And I would say, in this business, that you have to really love what you're doing for that reason, but at the same time, that's why I do love the job, is because there's no day alike ever. And it's, in the end of the day, it's all about the music, really, especially with them.
What did you do to prepare yourself for that kind of job? Just do it? You learn it by doing it?
I had a good family.
No, the funny part was when he came and he applied for the job, we're sitting there trying to tell him exactly how all of this is going to go on, and he's so wide-eyed. He's like, okay, sure, okay, now. Make sure you keep your phone on 24 hours.
Yeah.
Because I'd say the first year, I mean, the hardest part for anybody taking this kind of job, with any artist, but for me, with Terence, it's learning to think like him. Because I got to think, all right, if this is going to happen, he's not going to like this, or he's going to like this, and just start, because he doesn't want me calling him, hey, do you prefer, Dasani water over Avion? You know, it's just, the saxophone player I need to find. But, you just learn and I find myself thinking like him all the time. I can talk to a promoter, and I know the answers to the questions of what he's going to like and what he's not, what time he likes to interview, what time he doesn't. 8 a.m., right?
And let me tell you, it's it's a godsend because, having both of these people, really makes it easy on me because the only thing I have to do is really worry about the music, and given the type of career that we all have, I mean, it's kind of interesting. It's like, my name is on the project, but it's not me. I mean, it's like all of us together, because we all have to juggle. I think, his job would be different if he worked for another artist who just did performances. Her job would be different, But by me having these 3 careers, which she kind of fostered, by the way, she didn't tell you that part. Yeah. Everybody's kind of stepped up to the plate and we make things work, And I think the most important thing about it all is throughout all of it is that these are nice people to work with or just to hang around. And that's become, before he came on board, that became our credo. Because, we can find people who know what they're doing, but if they're not pleasant to be around and they're not pleasant to work with, we don't need it. Because
we spend so much time together. It's hard to carve out business and personal. It really is. We spend a lot of time together. So you have to be able to get along and to know how to work together and just live together. That may sound really hokey and like we are the world. It's really true.
It's really true. I mean, even we had to check Jim out before we put.
Well, you mentioned the word flow, and I know the concept of flow is important to you in your music, and I think the title of one of your last records was Flow. Can you talk to us about that for a second?
Well, I mean, the title actually came from Vinny. I mean, because when we were trying to figure out how to describe what the band was, we couldn't. It was hard for us to find one word. And when we were doing the record, we recorded a lot of tunes, and I tell a story all the time, even doing live shows. we ran out of tunes, we ran out of material. You know, and Herbie Hancock was producing the record, and he really said, why don't you go out there and improvise, make something up, you know? And we did that, and we came up with a tune that became probably one of the lighthearted tunes to play. We had a lot of fun playing it. But Vinny had been reading this book, you know, about flow and about this whole concept of, you know, being in a state of flow. And it perfectly described what the band does. Because, you know, on any given night, man, this band the band will go in different directions, you know. And, you know, we've always heard about that, you know, but to actually have a group that does that, I feel very blessed to have that, you know. And because it makes it a lot of fun for us, you know, because you got to remember, if we're on the road, we're playing the same tunes over and over and over and over again. You know, so we have to keep our motivation high because, you know, people who come to hear us, that's what they're looking for. You know, our break used to say music washes away the dust of everyday life. You know, and I really believe that. In order for us to do that, we have to be excited about what we do. So if you come and see this band perform, you know, people say, man, you guys look like you're having a lot of fun. Is that pretend? It's like, no, that's just really the way we are, you know. And Vinny could probably tell you more about the book itself, but when he described what the book is about, it just totally spoke to what it is we do as a group.
It does seem that it's a nice way to make music. If you're not thinking about making it, you're just making it. So, Terence, how do you go about hiring your musicians? I mean, if you're hiring family members at the same time, essentially.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know. When it comes to hiring musicians, man, I mean, there's a lot that goes involved. There's a lot that's involved in the process. You know, in terms of, I'll always talk to the guys first. Have you heard about so and so? Have you heard him play? What do you think? Have you heard anything about him? You know, what's going on? You know, and I get a lot of information from my sidemen. You know, and then sometimes we bring guys on the road. You know, and we try them out. You know, we don't tell them that. You know, we just say, hey, man, I need you to fill in for this person here. I need you to fill in for that person. And we say, let's just see how it goes. Bryce Winston, perfect example, man. You know, I had a tenor player who was playing in the band at the time, and he could make some dates. So I was always a fan of Bryce Winston's, you know, because I knew him from living here. And I said, well, let's try him on these gigs. And I remember we were in Sedona, Arizona, and he came on the gig, man. And we were laughing. Ed Simon, who was the pianist at the time, we were laughing because Bryce, you know, was playing on the gig like, oh, you're going to remember me. You know, he had this kind of attitude in his playing. You know, he didn't say it verbally. And we did. And he was such a joy to be around and such a smart person and very inspirational person to be around. And when it came time for me to make that decision, he was the first person I called. So, I mean, it goes a lot of way, in a lot of different directions. You know, the bassist, you know, Derek Hodge, you know, we were having problems with some of the bass players who were playing in the band. We had, you know, great musicians in the group, and the bass player was the weakest chair at the time. And we just didn't see anybody around. Didn't see anybody around. And there was a drummer who had played with us before, Rodney Green. He said, look, man, you need to check on my boy, Derek. I hadn't heard of him. Just called him, just based on that recommendation. And we did a gig. Where was that gig? Well, that's where it was? I thought it was like upstate New York or something.
I think it was in the middle of the country.
Okay. And we go through this a lot. And Derek, when he played on the gig, he just fit in automatically.
Isn't that good?
I mean, and it was amazing because after the gig, I walked up to him and I said, hey, man, if you want this job, it's yours. And just because of his playing and his personality. And let me tell you something. Derek is one of the most talented guys I've ever seen play that instrument. And he's also one of the nicest people on the planet. Yeah. And that means a lot to us, man, because, you know, when you're out on the road, you know, you have to stick together, especially in these days and times that we're living in right now. And then B, for health reasons. You know, we have to look out for each other because, you know, we're out there on the road, you know, and we have to be family. And it makes a big difference because it also comes across on the stage and it also comes across in the music that we play and perform. I mean, the band that I have right now, at this particular point in my career, is probably the best band I've ever had in my life, you know. And I'm really thankful to have those guys because they inspire me to want to continue to do this. You know, I've been a fan of Herbie Hancock's, man, for so many years. You know, growing up here in New Orleans, I had listened to all of his records, and when I got a chance to meet him, I was just overjoyed. And then I started working with him at the Monk Institute. And working with him at the Monk Institute for about the last 6 or 7 years has been serious education for me. Because with Wayne and Herbie, like this weekend, I'm going to go up to DC for the Monk competition. And when I'm around those guys for a weekend like that, we constantly have musical conversations. And I'm always learning from them, learning something that I haven't learned before, or they're opening my eyes to certain things. And when I looked at the band that I have, you know, a lot of the many directions that this band can go in, you know, he was the first person I thought of in terms of finding somebody to produce the record. And working with him was a total joy. I mean, it was an amazing thing to witness. I mean, Robin was so amazed by it. You know, she called a family member of hers and just flew out. She said, you need to witness this and just watch what these guys are doing. Because to have a person like Herbie Hancock tell us, he said, well, who's playing like your band? You know, we never thought, you know, you try to be humble in this business, you know, and you never want to think of yourselves as being, you know, on a certain level. I mean, we're always trying to get better, but we're always trying to be honest about what it is that we do too. And when a person like that makes a statement like that, it's a truly humbling and experience, and it's also a great honor. You know, I mean, he constantly questioned us, you know, in terms of what it is that we were doing. Why are you going to play that ballad that way? That, you know, people always play ballads that way. Do something else. Do something different, you know. And I find myself thinking about those sessions that he did with Miles, and I felt like I was in the same situation, because here it is, this is a great musician just telling us to trust yourself and to be yourself. He said, you've done the work, you guys have come along, now just trust it. And I tell you, it was interesting because one night, you know, he started talking to us about the plug nickel sessions. And I forgot what tune we did. I think it was Kendrick's tune. We went on and did a take of it, and the band sounded very much like the plug nickel stuff. And we started laughing because, you know, we knew exactly right at that moment that we had been influenced by this conversation. And we knew we had to we were like, hey, time out, cut. Let's do another take. So we took a break, and then we started really relying on what it is that we like, what it is that we're about, and the things that Herbie told us. And we went back in, and the music sounded totally different. And that from that point on, I think everybody in my band has been totally changed, you know, in their artistry, because, you know, we've kind of, you know, been blessed by somebody like a Herbie Hancock, who's come along and said, you know, you guys are on a path. Make sure you stay on that path. You know, and that's been our whole thing, just to try to find our sound, our rhythm, you know, our colors, and not be afraid of that, and embrace it, and have as much fun with it as we can.
He was great there. Just in terms of business, I mean, you think of Herbie Hancock, and he's an icon, and he went into the studio without any paperwork, and when I got the paperwork, because the record company said, oh, you guys are crazy, Herbie Hancock will not do that project because the budget is not going to be big enough for Herbie's fee. Herbie asked for 1/10 of what his fee usually is, and he asked for producer points that aren't recoupable against Terence's account with the record company. And he made it so that his advance isn't recoupable against Terence's account. And for Herbie Hancock to do that was just, the record company was blown away. I mean, they couldn't believe that. They had never seen anything like it. We had never heard anything like that before. And, you know, just a dream on so many levels. Of course, you know, Terence, like he said, creatively and artistically. And then for me, in terms of business, I did the deal with his assistant, and then his assistant had it translated by the lawyers. It's the easiest thing that you could even think of.
To just give you another idea about what it was like, you know, I always tell a story too, that, because I think it's important, you know, when we were recording the album, we would start the sessions at 10 a.m. and we would go to probably about 10 p.m. But Herbie was such a force, you know, to be around. He would hang in the studio, man, to about 2 a.m. And we would just hang, talking about anything. You know, he's a computer geek and he loves cars. So we got a lot in common, you know. And we would talk about cameras, race cars, just all kinds of stuff, music. And it was truly a joy to be around him because his openness translated into our approach to playing, you know. And when he sat down at the piano, that was a totally different type of lesson, you know, because the entire session was just filled with lessons, the entire session, you know. And I always say that I'm sorry. I always say that I wish I could put all of the takes on one CD, you know, because they were so different in their approach. He's truly an artist, you know. He's not going to play the little lick he's rehearsed a million times, you know. He's going to try to come up with something that makes the music work, you know. And if he tries something and it doesn't work, he moves on. And if he tries something and it does work, he still moves on. You know, and that is humbling, you know, because when you see somebody who has that ability and that openness and willingness to do that, it really puts your own musical approach in check.
It must have been a fascinating experience. So it had to inform your own teaching.
Oh.
Right? So it changed you in more than one way.
It changed me in so many ways because, you know, I looked at formal education as a means of getting everybody to do the same thing. And working with Herbie, he made me understand that that's not necessarily the best approach for certain artists. I mean, look, we all need to learn fundamentals, we all need to learn theory and all of that stuff. But when you talk about being creative, some guys have very different things to say. And you have to appreciate that and embrace it, you know. Sometimes, you know, and the thing that I've learned as a teacher is that I don't get everything my students do. I don't get it at first, you know, because they'll come up with things and I'll say, man, what is that? And I'll ask them to explain it. As long as they can explain it to me and it makes sense, I'm with it. And then next thing you know, I start to understand where they're coming from. You know, like the class that I have now at the Monk Institute, these guys, their rhythmic sense is off the chain. I mean, you know, the stuff that they write, you know, in terms of how they displace rhythm is totally, it's extremely unique. And they don't even realize what they're doing. They're just doing things. And they come to me, you know, nervous, you know, with this nervous look on their face, like I'm about to tear their music apart, which I do. But I'm also very amazed at what they do. And I learned all of that from being around Herbie and Wayne, you know, just talking to them. Because those guys are so open. And that's the thing I think you really need to understand. People, you know, tend to think that when you get to a certain level, these guys are like, oh, I'm Herbie Hancock, you need to step. No, they're totally the opposite. You know, they're very open individuals. They're interested in trying anything. If you come up with something that intrigues them, they say, hey man, let's try it. We'll never know until we try. And I love that, you know, because when you approach not only music but life that way, then the sky's the limit. It's true.
I have really strong feelings.
That's the polite way.
Clear Channel. I'll let you go, Dawn.
No, I mean, you know, and before Clear Channel, man, it was like easy listening, it was Quiet Storm. There was all these formats. And the thing that I resent about those formats is that those formats want to kind of label themselves as being jazz or label themselves or try to pick up on the integrity of the jazz community as their own. And for me, you need to just go and do your own thing because we don't really benefit from that. Because they don't play our records that much. And a lot of those folks don't really come to embrace this music like most people think that they do. I've heard people say, oh, well, isn't this a way for them to get introduced to it? I'm like, how? If they're not listening to John Coltrane on Clear Channel, how are you going to get introduced to John Coltrane? To me, it's...
Or if they're not playing jazz. If they've got if they're calling the station a jazz station, but they're playing Bette Midler, or they're playing like, I don't even want to start naming.
Well, and the thing is, and let me be very clear about this, you know, I'm not indicting those musics because I listen to a lot of different type of music. So it's not about the music, it's about the marketing and it's about the approach, it's about the misleading. It's very similar to us looking for weapons of mass destruction and not finding it. It's the same kind of thing. I'm not a firm believer in like telling, especially when it comes to young, impressionable kids. I really get kind of upset with that because You know, some of these kids, man, if you just introduce them to anything, they'll make up their own minds about it. You don't have to lie to them about it, you know. But this seems to be more of a marketing thing than actually a promotion thing, you know. And I have yet to run into most of my fans that come to my shows. Look, man, they know a lot about all different types of music, you know, and they know a lot about jazz. I mean, you know, I don't know any other way to just let you know how I feel about it, that kind of stuff. You know, because there are a lot of places that I play where they do Sunday matinees, especially for young people, you know, and that's a big part of what they do. And I see that, I mean, I'm getting old enough now where some of the people come to the night shows, where people used to come to the matinees when I was younger. It's like, don't come up here, I don't want to hear about that. How old are you now? You still shouldn't be here. Shit, go on. But, you know, I think that's very important. That's an extremely important component to the arts community, because, you know, we need to grab the youngsters while they're impressionable, while they can make up their own minds, you know, because I look at the marketing of all of this stuff. I remember, man, when I first got into business in the 80s, I had a problem with the word artist. I still do, I'm kind of gotten over it a bit, but I had a problem with that word, because to me that word is a very sacred word. When you say somebody's an artist, and the word genius, those two words have been overused in our communities for decades, and we got to stop doing that, because we're doing a disservice to the people who are real geniuses and are real artists in the community. And what happens is, when you label a person an artist or a genius, we tend to believe anything they say. And our kids will listen to anything they say. And you got to think about that. And I know I'm not trying to be like, you know, of the McCarthy era where we're going to sit down and like watch what everybody does. But at the same time, I do think that it's very important to call it what it is, so that all of the young folks can make an honest decision. And like I said, I'm not indicting those musics, because look, I've worked with a lot of different people. I listen to a lot of different music, you know, but we just need to really be honest about what it is we're doing and what we're listening to. There's a thing, man, you know, when you learn how to play, that's a technical thing. You learn how to play your instrument, you learn how to improvise, learn the theory and all of that stuff. But if you're lucky enough to be dumb enough to let your heart guide you, you know, then at a certain point in your life, something clicks, you know, and that's how I was. I was too dumb to know the difference. And when I started traveling, even before I traveled, just living here and experiencing the musicians that I lived here, that I grew up with living here, and the conditions and just everything that, you know, you go through in terms of just trying to survive. And I didn't struggle. I mean, we grew up middle class, but, you know, we had our issues. You know, those things affect you in certain ways that just become a part of you. And when you travel, you know, you go to other places, you see how other people live. You see how other people have not a tenth of what we have in terms of material wealth, but they have 100 times what we have in terms of integrity, self-esteem. You know, it starts to make you question your belief system, you know. And then in doing that, me personally, when I perform, sometimes I always try to lose myself in what it is that we do on the bandstand. And those emotions and those anxieties, frankly, all of that stuff comes out in ways that we can't describe. Hence the reason why we do what we do. You know, I think part of being an artist is therapy, frankly. You know, you always talk about, you hear comedians talk about they grew up and grew up with a lot of pain in their lives, which is one of the reasons why they laugh all the time. Well, I think the same thing happens with artists in a sense. You know, there's sometimes when we play, and Vinny can tell you, because, you know, we can't explain what it is that we do, but we're affected by everything that we touch or everything that we see. We'll sit down and we wake up in the morning, man, in The Hague, and we'll start talking about, man, did you see what happened? Man, how could this happen? How can people do this? Man, what's going on? These guys are very conscientious, and that makes a big difference in the music, you know. I think it all starts with your personality first, frankly. I think if you have it, you have it, you know. And I mean, you could speak on this. I mean, but
We were just in France as a good example. On the tour we did, there was a gig in a monastery. Well, it was once a monastery, 300-year-old monastery in France, a Chartreuse monastery, and now it's a writers guild. And Terence played in the monastery, and they put the guys up in the monastery. Now these rooms were,
Not 4-star.
yes, there was no TV, no 600 thread count pillows and sheets, and
Those aren't
there's
my rider requirements either.
no room service.
no room service. And the guys were all actually 3 per room. Actually, we had our own little bedrooms, but in the beds weren't nice by any means. But he's had people in his band before that I could tell you would have complained the entire time we were there. But the band he has now, which says a lot about the personalities that he attracts, they realize how beautiful it was and what a great opportunity they have in life to be there. Like, not everybody gets that opportunity, and they definitely take that with them. And they say that all the time when they're on the road, like, can you believe we're doing this? What a great opportunity we have in life. And I think, and he's right, they take that, every little thing that happens to them as we go along, they take to the bandstand, and you can tell.
That's terrific. Well, we have a few minutes left. I'd like to ask you, Benny, about a lot of the students here want to be in the support system for artists, the jobs that you and I do, and Robin does. What advice would you give to them?
Make sure you love it, and be in it for the right reasons. Not for, by no means is behind the scenes that glamorous all the time. Really, and it's not, you're not in the spotlight, and not to mention even what the band goes through when they're not in the spotlight. 6 a.m. wake-up calls and, security checks every day and spending like 45 minutes.
Tell them about the London thing, man.
Or after that Chartreuse gig, the Terence thing happened in London just recently, and our next gig was in London. And if you're a musician, you know that you would carry your saxophone, your trumpet on the plane. So we couldn't carry anything on the plane, so.
And the flight was canceled.
The day of, I realized I had to drive all the equipment, so I drove throughout the night to London, got on a ferry, drove to London to the gig. At 8 a.m. I got in London, just happy to be there. Terence called and said that flight just was canceled. So then they had to go and get on the train. It was trains, planes, automobiles. And just to get them there just in time to walk on the stage and play. Where I think the majority of the time the audience really thinks that these guys did nothing all day, and they show up and they play and they just have a good time. But literally, it's sometimes a 20-hour gig, on how much you have to work. And things don't always go your way. And that's why I say flexibility is, for my job, you got to learn to pick your battles. You got to learn what to really get excited over and upset about, and what not. And you take your lumps, a lot of the time. But
You take the crunchy and the smoothie.
right? Well put. Not the way I would have put it. Someone's better at it.
So, Robin, let me ask you the same question. What skills, what experiences, what knowledge do people need to have to do your job?
I think everyone in this room is farther along than I was at your age. I was studying foreign politics and policies of the Middle East and wanting to be a diplomat in Washington, D.C. I had no idea that I was going to end up in the music industry. But a friend of mine told me about a job, I applied for it, and just from the moment I set foot in that job, I knew that I just wanted to stick with it. And I never had this attitude, with any of my bosses, like, my job title says that I'm a promotions manager. I cannot pack a CD box. I did whatever they asked me to do. And having that kind of mindset and doing various things along the way put me exactly where I am today. Because at no point did I say, oh, I can't do that. I can't go run a budget over by hand across town to a record company executive. Let so-and-so do it. Every single opportunity I had, and Terence will tell you this, I'm sure, in terms of his film career. Spike came to him and said, hey man, can you, write an arrangement for one of your tunes for Mo Better Blues? And Terence is like, yeah. He had never written a scene for a movie before. So that one scene in Mo Better Blues just Now he's on his 38th film.
But I'm gonna say something else about that too, to the musicians. That also applies to the musicians too, because you never know when opportunity is gonna knock, you know, and you know, humility goes a long way. Ego goes not too far. You know, the example that I'll give to you is that Derek Hodge, you know, I get this all the time, you know, I get all the time, man, I want to do what you do, man, that film thing, yeah, bro, I want to go off and jump off in that, man, you know, because I always like film. I hear that all the time, you know. And when I hear that, I go, okay, all right, I know what's going on. Derek Hodge came to me and he said, man, I love to be a fly on the wall just when you're writing. And I don't do that, you know, and he said it a few times, and then he was respectful, he backed off. But then he came up to me, he said, hey man, well, if I can't do that, what scores do you think I should listen to? So I gave him some scores I thought that he should listen to at the time, Glory, Shawshank Redemption, and some other things. And next thing you know, he's playing some of those themes on the piano when we're doing sound check. Then he's playing some of my themes from some of my films on the piano doing sound check. So automatically in my mind, I'm sitting there saying to myself, this guy is a self-starter, self-motivator, and I don't have to baby him. He's on it. He really wants to do this. So when we were doing Inside Man, I was doing Inside Man, another project, and I had a third project. I couldn't do it. I got Derek to do it.
Really?
Yes. And
Flew himself out to LA.
yeah, he flew himself out to LA just to be out there, wanted to do it, and we needed to be in close proximity so I could just check his work and just, you know, kind of oversee what he was doing. But he did a great job. As a matter of fact, if you watch The Levees, he wrote 3 scenes. Yeah, he did 3 scenes for The Levees. And, you know, I'm saying this to you to just say to you that, you know, opportunities will come, but, you know, you have to present yourself in a certain way. You gotta, it's not about telling people what you want to do, it's about showing people what you want to do, you know, because I grew up and I'm, you know, I've been around a bunch of people who will talk to me and talk my ears off, you know, but at the end of the day, that's all it is, it's all talk. But most of the guys that I know who are successful, James Newton Howard, Thomas Newman, Harry Gregson Williams, all of those guys in the film business and on the jazz side, Branford Brenton, Joshua, all of these guys are self-motivated people, you know, with determination. And that's what you need to get anywhere, because none of the stuff was perfect for us. None of it, you know. I never knew what to do to get a gig in jazz. I just knew I wanted to play. And I wanted to play very badly. I went to New York because I heard that's where you need to be in New York. And I practiced just because I didn't know what was going to happen, just because I liked to play. That's the reason why I practiced. And because of that practicing, you know, I got a gig with Art Blanchard. And there's a number of stories like that. I mean, the one that I always tell is, look, you know, you guys are a little older, a little young to remember Magic Johnson when he was playing. But the stories that we used to hear about him all the time is how he just kept a basketball in his hand all the time. So it drove his mother nuts. Kept hearing that bouncing of the ball all day long. But that's very much akin to what we do as artists, you know? Playing music all the time, trying to learn something all the time, not being comfortable with where we are, but always trying to better ourselves, you know, because life doesn't stand still. You may think that you're standing still. My teacher used to tell me all the time, he says, if you're standing still and the world is revolving and you're actually moving backwards, you know, so you gotta move forward just to keep pace with everything that's going on.
Most of y'all don't know that Terence played his high school recitals in this very room. This is the spot for you, right?
Yeah, right here, man. That's why I'm sitting there tripping. I'm looking around like, wow. As a matter of fact, you know what's funny? As a matter of fact, on this very stage, we had a high school competition, a jazz band competition, and the judges heard me and they liked me. They heard me play a solo, and they dug what I was doing. And Freddie Hubbard was in town playing at a club out in Fat City, and they called my parents and asked if they could take me to the show, and I met Freddie Hubbard, and got a chance to play with him and sat with him that night, all based because of this playing on this stage right here.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you talking to us today, and thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.